Hey guys, tonight we drift into a place where every breath fogs the air in front of your face, where stone walls rise like frozen cliffs, and where the wind, yes, that same wind you thought you left outside, decides to follow you indoors out of pure pettiness. You're stepping toward a medieval castle, and already your fingers are wishing you'd worn thicker gloves. The torches flicker along the massive gatehouse, their flames doing their best impression of helpful lighting while actually illuminating nothing but the cold reality of what you're about to experience. Somewhere deep inside, a door thuds shut, and you get that tiny shiver that whispers, "You probably won't survive this." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing the little constellation of listeners around the world settling in for stories like this. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You approach the castle gate as the drawbridge lowers with a groaning sigh, like it, too, is tired of holding everything together. The wooden planks rattle under your feet as you step forward, and the moat below reflects a dull slice of moonlight that shimmers with that "don't fall in or you'll become a medieval popsicle" energy. You move carefully, feeling the cold seep through your boots. The air here is heavier, denser, scented faintly with damp straw and the distant smoke of a fire that isn't pulling its weight in the warmth department. A guard nods at you, his breath puffing like miniature clouds. His armor clinks as he shifts, and you realize metal armor in winter is basically an elaborate ice bucket challenge that never ends. That's your first mainstream historical fact of the night. Guards really did stand outside in full armor for long shifts, and even with padded gambesons underneath, they froze their medieval socks off. You give the guard a tiny sympathetic nod, even though he doesn't react. He's busy trying to remember what warmth felt like. The gatehouse looms above you, its portcullis raised but still looking like it could drop at any moment just to add a little drama. As you step beneath it, the gap between the iron bars and the stone ceiling feels claustrophobic in that "please don't reenact any accidental guillotine moments" way. You can't help imagining spikes, yelling guards, chaos. Then remind yourself this is supposed to be a sleepy story, so you mentally swap the imagined chaos for pillows. Lots of pillows, scented ones even, lavender. Inside the gate passage, you feel the temperature drop another degree. These spaces were intentionally designed to trap invaders, but apparently they also trap cold air like a champion. Your breath forms a thin mist, and your shoulders instinctively rise as if run by little cold, cautious puppeteers. Your boots crunch over old grit and gravel mixed with straw. The sound echoes, because of course it does. Everything in a castle echoes. An old quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some early castles used wooden planks or rush mats even in the gatehouse, not for comfort, but to absorb spilled liquids. Let's say liquids you don't want to think about as you're trying to fall asleep. But don't worry. Tonight, you're walking on the clean kind, or at least the kind that's old enough to have forgotten its own origins. Up ahead, a torch flickers, then another, lighting up the inner courtyard like a medieval parking lot with the energy efficiency of 3 struggling light bulbs. The flames whip sideways as the wind tunnels between the structures, and you catch yourself hunching further. Honestly, you can't blame the castle. It wasn't built to be cozy. It was built to be terrifying to attackers and mildly miserable to everyone else. Historians still argue whether people who lived in castles simply grew more used to the cold or if they suffered constantly and just didn't write it down. Considering the lack of heated blankets and hot chocolate, you have your guess, but you keep it to yourself as you step fully inside the courtyard. The ground is uneven underfoot, patches of frozen mud, scattered hay, a few footprints iced into permanence. You follow a faint path toward the keep, the central stone tower rising like a gray giant, blocking half the sky. The thing about castles is that they're impressive from the outside. On the inside, they're basically giant stone fridges with a touch of aesthetic flair. You clutch your cloak closer, imagining how people once walked the same path in layers upon layers of wool, fur, linen. Basically, a medieval fashion show dedicated entirely to not freezing to death. Even nobles, with all their fancy fabrics and tailors, weren't immune. Cold finds everyone. It's like that one co-worker who always overhears the gossip no matter where it happens. Someone walks past you, carrying a stack of firewood, and you notice their breath comes out in short, frosty bursts. They don't acknowledge you, not because they're rude, but because they're extremely focused on the thought of fire good, cold bad. You silently cheer them on like a sideline coach for medieval heating. A dog trots by, a wiry castle mutt with fur that looks permanently damp. He gives you a sniff, decides you're not edible, and marches on. You admire his resilience. Dogs back then worked hard for scraps, warmth, and the occasional chance to bark at absolutely nothing. The wind whistles again, and you swear it purposely detours through a nearby arrow slit just to slap you in the face. Castle designers definitely didn't consult comfort experts. They consulted war experts, draft enthusiasts, and apparently people who thought windows are for letting the cold in. You approach a set of stone steps leading up toward the main doorway of the keep. The steps are narrow, tilted slightly downward, and feel like they're daring you to slip for comedic effect. You grab the rough stone wall beside you. It's cold, so cold you half expect it to hum like a refrigerator compressor. Your fingertips tingle. As you climb, a few details catch your eye. The grooves worn into the stair edges by generations of feet. The soot stains near the doorframe from torches long extinguished, and the tiny carved mark shaped like a bird. Maybe it was a stonemason showing off. Maybe it was a bored guard. Maybe it was someone trying to summon a warmer season. You whisper a tiny wish to the stone bird, something along the lines of, "Hey, maybe make it less cold." But it doesn't respond. Typical. At the doorway, 2 torches burn, crackling with just enough enthusiasm to pretend they're helpful. You glance back across the courtyard, taking in the clusters of outbuildings, the silhouettes of towers, and the distant shimmer of the moat. It's impressive, yes, but you can't shake the feeling that every part of this place is bracing itself for winter all year long. You pull the heavy door open. It creaks like it hasn't had a good oiling since before the Renaissance. A gust of colder air, yes, somehow colder, flows past you as if the castle is sighing, "Good luck, buddy." You step inside. You ease the heavy door shut behind you, and for a moment you imagine the warmth rushing in to greet you like an eager puppy. Instead, the door thuds closed, and the air inside the keep hits you with the thermal personality of a walk-in freezer. Congratulations, you've officially upgraded from outside cold to premium stone-aged indoor cold, which is somehow worse because you expected better. Your footsteps echo as you move forward, swallowed by the dim corridor ahead. The hallway stretches long and narrow, its stone walls rising beside you in the kind of unforgiving gray that makes you wonder if medieval interior decorators ever considered, tapestries. A few exist, yes, but not here. This corridor is bare, which makes it perfect for feeling drafts creep around your ankles. The wind threads itself through the arrow slits as if performing a delicate dance called Let's Annoy the Newcomer. You rub your arms trying to coax warmth back into them. Even with a heavy cloak, you feel the chill spiraling inward. The floor beneath your boots is uneven, polished in some places from centuries of footsteps and dusty in others, as if the castle is still shedding tiny bits of itself over time. Each step kicks up a faint musty smell, old stone mixed with something like wet wool and extinguished torches. It's the castle equivalent of stepping into your grandparents' basement, if your grandparents were medieval warlords with questionable heating strategies. As you walk, a guard passes by carrying a lantern. The faint yellow glow makes the shadows more dramatic, turning every bump in the stonework into some mysterious shape. He nods once, giving off strong, I don't get paid enough for this energy. It's a perfect moment for your first quirky tidbit of this section. Some castles really did have people assigned to check corridor temperatures and airflow. Not for comfort, mind you, but to keep fires from blowing out or smoke from choking everyone to death. A medieval HVAC system, if HVAC stood for Here's Very Awful Cold. You continue along the hallway, brushing your fingertips against the wall. It's damp, slightly slick, as if the castle is sweating. A disconcerting thought considering it's barely above freezing. The air carries a faint mineral scent, the kind you'd expect from caves or stone cellars. If you listen closely, you can hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, each plink echoing like a droplet falling inside a giant bell. A torch flickers on your right, set into an iron bracket hammered directly into the wall. Its flame sputters each time a draft snakes through an arrow slit. You lean closer, hoping for warmth, but the flame offers only the illusion of heat, like a medieval screensaver meant to fool you into thinking the room isn't freezing. You pull back with a small sigh, muttering to yourself about how your modern space heater could conquer this entire castle with a single low setting. As you venture deeper, the corridor twists slightly to the left. The castle seems designed to confuse newcomers, or possibly to amuse the architect, who must have enjoyed watching people wander in circles. There's a small side passage branching off, its archway little more than a dark mouth yawning open. You tilt your head in curiosity, but decide against exploring it. Tonight isn't the night for getting lost in a centuries-old stone maze, especially one with the emotional warmth of an ice sculpture. Up ahead, the corridor widens slightly, and you catch the faint scent of burning tallow candles. The smell isn't pleasant, more barnyard chic than soothing spa, but it's at least familiar, hinting that people occasionally inhabit this hallway. Your breath curls into the air as you walk, though, so inhabited is a generous word. Clearly, nobody's spending quality leisure time here unless they've lost a bet. You pause beside an arrow slit, a narrow vertical slit cut through the wall. It's barely wider than your hand, but the wind squeezes through it with gleeful determination. You lean over and try to glance outside, where the night sky smudges across the horizon in dark blues and silvers. The arrow slit frames only a thin slice of it, like a postcard made for someone who hates scenery. A stray gust gusts through, pressing your cloak against your legs. You pull back quickly, closing your eyes as if the slit just insulted you personally. This feels like the right moment for your historical fact. Arrow slits weren't just skinny windows. They were carefully engineered to allow defenders to shoot outward in a wide arc, while giving attackers almost no way to shoot in. But while brilliant for defense, they were catastrophically good at letting in cold drafts. In winter, some records describe people stuffing them with cloth, straw, or even spare wood planks just to keep their rooms livable. Of course, you're in a corridor, so no one bothered stuffing anything here. Lucky you. You continue walking, and a faint sound grabs your attention. The soft flutter of wings. For a second, your brain conjures a dramatic image of a ghostly bat swooping at your face, but then something small and feathery darts past, a castle pigeon. It lands on a wooden beam overhead, watching you with the judgmental expression only pigeons have mastered. You nod politely. It coos back, sounding unimpressed. You wonder aloud if medieval household birds got cold too. Historians still argue whether castle pigeons were treated as pests or unofficial pets, but you suspect the real answer is whichever option involved the least effort. Still, their presence adds a strange charm to the corridor, an extra heartbeat of life inside this otherwise frozen tunnel. Your boots scuff against another stretch of flooring as you turn a corner and stumble into a pocket of deceptively mild air. Not warm, no, just slightly less freezing. The shift feels heavenly. You close your eyes and soak in the almost warmth, imagining that this is what victory tastes like. Unfortunately, it lasts all of 8 seconds before fading back into standard castle chill. You pass a wooden door to your left. It's bolted shut, the wood swollen from moisture, as if it's been that way for decades. A thin draft whistles through the cracks around its frame, which makes you wonder what's behind it. Maybe storage, maybe an unused room, or maybe the castle's personal collection of stubborn cold spirits. You resist the urge to test it. The universe has already provided you with enough medieval discomfort for one hallway. 2 servants shuffle past, carrying baskets of kindling. Their wool cloaks are patched and layered, and their faces are flushed pink from the cold. You overhear one complaining about how the draft in this corridor could freeze soup mid-spill. The other laughs, though it comes out more like a cough. You give them an empathetic smile, though they barely notice. They're too busy trying to get supplies to wherever the next fire is failing. As you keep moving, a series of iron sconces leads you toward another turn. The corridor ahead slopes downward a little, just enough to make you feel you're entering the castle's deeper belly. The air becomes heavier, colder, and somehow quieter, as if the stone itself is muffling sound. For a moment, you picture yourself walking through your own hallway at home. Warm air, carpet, maybe that one squeaky floorboard. You realize with a slow smile that modern hallways are basically 5-star luxury resorts compared to this frozen medieval obstacle course. The corridor bends again, leading you toward a faint golden glow. You take a few more steps, your cloak whispering around your ankles, and find yourself on the edge of a much larger space, one that promises, if nothing else, a change from the cold monotony of stone tunnels. You step forward, ready for whatever the castle has in store next. You step out of the narrow corridor, blinking as your eyes adjust to the sudden bloom of firelight ahead. The space opens around you in a wide, echoing sprawl. The great hall, the majestic heart of the castle, the place where feasts happen, alliances form, power displays unfold, and where the temperature is only marginally warmer than outside. You pause at the threshold and take it in, letting the scene wash over you in slow motion medieval underwhelm. The first thing you notice is the ceiling, high enough to make you feel like an ant at a cathedral construction site. Wooden beams stretch overhead, each one thick enough to double as a tree trunk. A few banners hang limply from the rafters, their colors dim in the low light, fluttering half-heartedly each time a draft slithers through the hall. And yes, there are drafts everywhere. You feel one brush your calves within seconds. It's as if the wind has been waiting specifically to bully you. In the center of the hall, a large hearth crackles, sending up a column of smoke that hesitates, then drifts sideways into a haze lurking near the ceiling. It's a smoky, shimmering cloud that makes you wonder whether the castle ever fully figured out the whole chimney concept. Spoiler, many didn't. Instead, smoke just hung around until it found a random exit, an arrow slit, a cracked tile, or straight into someone's sinuses. You take a cautious breath, feeling the ancient scent of burning oak swirl past your lips. Not unpleasant, but definitely something you'd expect from a campsite run by cold, soot-covered lumberjacks. Your boots crunch over the rushes strewn across the floor, dried plant stalks mixed with herbs. They were meant to insulate and freshen the air, but tonight they give off a faint, earthy scent reminiscent of forest after a rainstorm, mixed with whatever spilled at last week's feast. A quirky tidbit pops into your head. Medieval folks sometimes added mint, lavender, or even wormwood to these rushes because, believe it or not, the herbs help discourage fleas. You wrinkle your nose, trying not to think too hard about what that implies about the flea situation. You wander forward, warming your hands near the large hearth. The heat is pleasant, but only if you're basically hugging the fire. Take 2 steps back, and the warmth drops off a cliff like a poorly designed roller coaster. Someone once said a single medieval fireplace could warm an entire hall. You privately decide that someone was a liar or had extremely low standards. Historians still argue whether great halls actually got comfortable, or whether people simply wore thick layers and pretended everything was fine. Judging by the faint numbness creeping into your fingertips, you're leaning toward the pretended everything was fine theory. A few servants move briskly through the hall, carrying jugs, platters, and stacks of wooden trenchers. Their footsteps send the rushes rustling, and one servant mutters about the cold stiffening her fingers. You notice that even though they're working near the fire, they stay bundled in their cloaks. You're starting to realize that in a medieval castle, warmth is basically a rumor. Along one wall, a long wooden table sits beneath a row of narrow windows. These windows, if they can be called that, let in a few strips of moonlight, but also usher in the winter air like an unwanted guest who refuses to knock. You pass by one of the openings and feel a sudden icy kiss across your cheek. You mumble a sleepy complaint under your breath, something about how even your refrigerator back home doesn't mock you like this. Your eyes drift upward to the dais at the far end of the hall. Here, a high-backed chair sits waiting for the lord or lady of the castle. It's big, ornate, and positioned in the draftiest spot possible, because medieval architectural logic apparently dictated, make the most important person sit where it's coldest. You picture a noble perched there, doing their best to look regal while discreetly shivering. You walk past several smaller tables arranged for retainers, guests, and various castle residents. The wood is worn smooth by dozens of elbows, mugs, and plates. You trail your fingers along the edge of one table and feel a faint stickiness that suggests someone spilled ale earlier and no one has dealt with it yet. Very medieval. A faint bustle near the back corner catches your attention. Two musicians quietly tune their instruments, a rebec and a small harp. The rebec player plucks a few tentative notes, which echo strangely in the cavernous hall, making the simple tune sound like a ghost learning to play. You smile softly, enjoying the oddly soothing effect. Music, even in a cold hall, can make the world feel a little gentler. You take a slow walk around the hearth, and as you approach the other side, a gust of wind snakes in through one of the high vents. The fire sputters, sending sparks dancing across the rushes. A servant immediately stomps them out, grumbling something like, "Every night with this wind." You can't help letting out a tiny laugh, the kind that fogs the cold air in front of your face. The hall's dimness settles into your bones, and you notice how the shadows move along the stone walls. They ripple with every flicker of flame, giving the impression that the castle itself is breathing. It's a comforting thought for exactly 1 second before you realize the castle's breath is freezing cold. A dog, possibly the same mutt you met earlier, trots up to you. He sniffs your boot, then sits at your feet as if declaring you his temporary human. You give him a little scratch behind the ears, and he leans in, soaking up whatever heat he can steal from your body. "We're both just trying to survive," you whisper. The dog gives you the look of someone who absolutely agrees. You turn your attention to the far wall, where a faded tapestry hangs. The fabric sways slightly in the drafts, and you step closer to inspect it. The image is a mix of knights, trees, and what you suspect is supposed to be a lion, but looks more like a confused goat. Still, the effort is charming. Tapestries weren't just decoration, they were insulation. Without them, halls like this would have been even colder, a thought that gives you fresh appreciation for whoever stitched this wobbly goat-lion thing. A faint chill brushes your shoulder, another corridor draft, sneaking in through some unseen crack. You instinctively wrap your cloak tighter, and the dog beside you huffs as if agreeing. You wander toward the central aisle once more, soaking in the slow rhythms of the space, the snap of logs, the clatter of pottery, the quiet hum of servants preparing for tomorrow's work. As you stand there, admiring the faint glow of firelight crawling across the stone floor, you realize the great hall isn't great because it's comfortable. It's great because it's the castle's beating heart. People gathered here for warmth, food, stories, arguments, celebrations, and the occasional medieval drama. You feel it even now, the sense of 1,000 moments layered over one another like warm blankets, even if the air is still cold enough to make you wish for thermal socks. You inhale the smoky air deeply, exhale slowly, and let the echoes of the hall settle into your mind, preparing you for the next steps of this strange, chilly journey. You drift away from the great hall's smoky bustle, drawn by the flicker of another firelight farther down a side passage. The air cools quickly because, of course, it does, and you brace yourself as you slip through a stone archway into a narrower chamber. Here, the fire isn't grand or ceremonial. It's small, sullen, and smoldering in a hearth that looks like it's been battling damp stone since the invention of masonry. You step closer, hoping for warmth, but the hearth gives you more smoke than heat, like it's personally offended by your expectations. The fire pops weakly, sending up a puff of ash that drifts toward you in a lazy arc. You cough delicately, polite cough, the medieval etiquette version, and wave the smoke away. A servant nearby glances up and shrugs as if to say, "Yeah, that's just how it is." And honestly, it is how it is. This castle has the energy efficiency of a potato with a candle stuck in it. You watch the flame wobble, barely clinging to life. It's fed by logs that are damp around the edges, each one hissing resentfully as it burns. That's your historical fact of the section. Firewood in medieval Europe was often stored outdoors or in semi-open sheds, meaning it routinely absorbed moisture. That wetness wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic for heating. A wet log burns like it's doing you a favor and resents every moment of it. The result? A lot of smoke, not much warmth, and a very enduring smell in your clothes. You crouch a little closer, rubbing your palms together. The fire gives off the kind of heat that feels like someone breathing gently on your hands from a distance. You stretch your fingers toward the blaze, silently apologizing for whatever modern sins have led you to this moment of thermal disappointment. Above the hearth, the chimney flue angles sharply upward, its mouth blackened with centuries of soot. A tiny curl of smoke escapes back into the room, proving that the chimney, much like the firewood, is not performing at peak levels. Historians still argue whether medieval chimneys were poorly designed or simply ahead of their time, but cursed with shoddy execution. Standing here, staring at a smoke cloud, trying to decide if it would rather exit the building or just marinate in the room for a while, you cast your vote. Shoddy execution. A sudden gust slips in through a gap in the nearby window shutter, hitting the back of your neck with the enthusiasm of a frosty handshake. The fire sputters in response, coughing out a few sparks like an offended dragonling. You scoot back instinctively, not because the sparks are dangerous, but because they seem petty enough to target your cloak out of spite. You swivel your head to inspect the shutter. It's wooden, thick, and reinforced with iron bands. But despite its serious visual vibe, it doesn't close tightly, and a steady whisper of cold air leaks through. You touch the edge and feel icy fingers of wind press against your skin. You picture some medieval resident stuffing wool or straw into the cracks just to take the edge off. Without central heating, everyone here was basically in a long-term relationship with drafts. You wander a few steps along the wall, feeling the texture of the stone beneath your fingertips. It's uneven, cool, and dotted with tiny depressions, like the castle has pores. The fire casts a warm glow in patches, leaving deep shadows between the flickers. The uneven lighting makes everything seem alive, constantly moving, even when it isn't. Your eyes catch on a cluster of iron hooks near the hearth, each one holding a pot or kettle. The metal is darkened by soot, edges glowing faintly with heat. The scent of old stews and roasted meats lingers in the air, stubborn as a memory. One pot in particular catches your attention. A thick iron cauldron sits wedged in the coals, its lid rattling occasionally as steam whistles from the sides. You lean in and inhale. The smell is earthy, warm, comforting, in a "this has been simmering since before breakfast" sort of way. A servant wanders over, lifts the lid with a rag, and gives the stew a lazy stir. You catch a glimpse of root vegetables, a few herbs, something meat-adjacent, and broth that looks hearty but slightly underwhelming. Typical medieval comfort food. Nearby, a group of servants huddles around a small brazier, basically a portable fire bowl on legs. The brazier glows red. giving off a little pocket of warmth that feels like a rare treasure. You drift toward it, feeling the heat on your shins first, then your hands. One servant eyes you and scoots over to give you more room. Without a word, the two of you share a mutual acknowledgement. Warmth is sacred. Hoarding it is a sin. Sharing it is holy. A quirky tidbit rises into your mind. Some medieval folks tried heating stones near the fire, then placing those warm stones under their cloaks or bedding. Essentially, early hot water bottles, but without the water. You imagine slipping a smooth, warm stone into your cloak now and sigh wistfully. If only this section of the castle were handing out complimentary heated rocks. As you stand there, warming your fingers and enjoying your fleeting moment of thermal bliss, a faint groaning sound creeps in from above. You tilt your head. The ceiling timbers creak as cold air seeps through the gaps in the upper walls. The room reacts by conjuring a new, sharper draft across your ankles. You groan back at the ceiling, as if scolding the architecture itself. The servants barely notice the noise. They're focused on their small brazier fire, occasionally poking at it with iron tongs. One mutters about how the big hearth isn't drawing properly tonight. Another nods sagely, offering zero solutions. Fire maintenance here is a constant battle, like trying to coax a reluctant toddler into eating vegetables. You return to the main hearth and sit on a low wooden stool. The stool legs wobble faintly, as if tired from decades of service. You rest your hands toward the fire again and close your eyes, accepting that the warmth you feel is temporary but precious. A moment later, something soft brushes your foot. You glance down. It's the castle dog again, curled up beside you like a furry heat thief. He sighs contentedly, the canine equivalent of, "We suffer together." You smile and let one hand drift down to ruffle his ears. Your thoughts wander. You imagine winter storms battering the castle walls, the fires struggling to keep up, and people layering themselves in wool, fur, linen, anything to combat the cold. Even nobles weren't immune. Drafts didn't respect social status. You picture a lord wrapped in a fur cloak, warming his hands just like you. Suddenly, it feels very human, the shared experience of trying to stay warm in a place built for defense rather than comfort. A final gust of cold sweeps across the room, and the fire flares angrily. You lift your face toward the ceiling, inhaling the smoky air, feeling the cold nip at your cheekbones. The castle is breathing again, and you're here inside it, chill smoke, creaks, stubborn fires and all. You stand slowly, feeling the stiffness in your knees from sitting close to the cold floor. Time to continue forward. The castle's story isn't finished yet, and neither is your long, chilly journey through it. You leave the smoldering hearth behind, stepping into another corridor that instantly reminds you that warmth in a castle is less a constant state and more a fleeting rumor. The chill wraps around you with familiar persistence, and you pull your cloak tighter as you wander toward a faint glimmer of outside light ahead. It's not sunlight. Don't get excited. It's the pale silver glow of the moon slipping through the castle's infamous tiny windows. The kind that make you wonder whether medieval architects were allergic to natural light or just profoundly committed to the aesthetic of gloom. You pause beside the nearest opening. It's an arrow slit, narrow, vertical, and just wide enough to let in every cold breeze within a 15-mile radius. You lean in for a peek and instantly regret it as a shard of icy wind slaps your cheek. Lovely. You mutter a sleepy complaint about how windows are supposed to let in warmth, not deliver targeted air assaults. Still, you peer through it anyway, watching the courtyard glimmer below in faint moonlight. It's peaceful, serene, and utterly frigid. You draw back slowly, like someone ending a toxic relationship. It's not me, it's you and your attitude toward insulation. A step forward brings you into a small chamber, more like an alcove, really. The room has two features, a narrow stone bench and another of those slit windows. You run your hand along the bench and feel the cold seep straight into your fingertips. Sitting here would be the medieval equivalent of resting on an ice block. You back away quickly, your instincts shouting something like, "Absolutely not. We like our tailbone unfrozen, thank you." You move on, climbing a short flight of steps to reach a larger room. This one has multiple windows, glorious, actual small windows, still horrible. But at least they're wider than arrow slits, maybe the width of your forearm. These ones would have had shutters or oiled cloth coverings in poor households, and, if the residents were lucky, a thin piece of horn or parchment scraped translucent. Glass was expensive, rare, and often too valuable for anything but the Lord's private chambers. That's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Most medieval windows weren't really windows, just openings with whatever covering the residents could improvise. You walk toward one, running your hand along the wooden shutter hanging loosely from an iron hinge. You give it a gentle push. It swings inward with a groan, revealing the night air waiting outside like an eager cat wanting attention. A blast of cold nips at your nose. You quickly swing the shutter closed, though closed is generous. It doesn't fully meet the frame, leaving a thin gap that whistles faintly. Medieval weatherproofing, brought to you by That'll Do, probably. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some households hung tapestries directly over windows to block drafts. Others stuffed rags or moss into the gaps. And then there were the truly dedicated souls who used animal hide stretched across the opening. The idea of stretching cowhide over your windows sounds bizarre now, but in this moment, feeling cold air creep under your collar, you start mentally rating cowhide as a top-tier luxury. You wander deeper into the room. A long wooden table sits in the center, and the air around it carries a faintly musty, papery scent. The tabletop is littered with wax strips, dents and scratches, battle scars from countless meals, meetings, and the occasional elbow argument. You run your fingers across it, imagining people gathering here during winter, huddled together for warmth because the windows refuse to cooperate. You look back at one of the shutters. It rattles gently in the wind. You're tempted to wedge something into the crack just to stop the draft. Maybe a loose piece of wood, or your cloak if you were especially desperate. But you leave it as it is, watching the flickering torchlight dance across the stone. You make your way toward the far wall, where two more windows sit side by side. They look almost artistic, thin slits of light slicing through the darkness, forming pale stripes on the floor. You step into one of the light beams, noticing how the glow turns your breath a shimmering wisp. You blow softly, watching the vapor twist upward like a tiny drifting phantom. You can almost hear the conversations that happened here centuries ago. People complaining about drafts. People praising the sunlight on the rare days it appeared. People arguing about meals, chores, or who forgot to bar the shutters properly. And always, in the background, the persistent hum of wind, an uninvited guest that never stopped talking. Historians still argue whether medieval architects engineered these windows primarily for defense or whether the limitations of building materials simply forced small openings. Some say the narrow windows were deliberate. They kept the walls strong and offered perfect shooting angles in wartime. Others argue practical constraints played a bigger role. Large window openings would weaken the stone walls and were too expensive to cover with glass. You stand here, feeling the draft swirl around your ankles, and think the real answer was probably a depressing mix of both. You leave the room and head down a new hallway lit by two shaky torches. Their flames flicker wildly each time a corridor draft slithers past, making the shadows dance across the floor like medieval puppetry. You walk through one of these shifting shadows, amused by how dramatic it feels, even though half the drama is probably your brain being sleepily theatrical. Up ahead, a small set of stone stairs spirals upward. You climb them slowly, hand trailing the wall. The stone feels cold enough to make your fingertips tingle. You mutter to yourself about how castles were basically giant rock refrigerators, and the steps carry your voice upward in soft echoes. At the top, you emerge into a slightly smaller chamber. This one actually has a window with primitive glass. Be still your heart. You approach it eagerly, placing your hands on the wooden frame. The glass is thick, uneven, and bubbly, like someone melted sand with too much enthusiasm and not enough expertise. But it's beautiful in its own way, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. You touch it gently. It's cold, of course, but it stops the wind. A medieval miracle. You lean forward, gazing through the distorted pane. The courtyard outside blurs into soft shapes, towers bending slightly, shadows warping, lights stretching into wavy lines. It's peaceful, almost dreamlike, like looking through water. You can see why wealthy nobles prized window glass so highly. Light without wind is a luxury you suddenly appreciate at a deep spiritual level. You notice a simple wooden bench beneath the window. You sit on it cautiously. It's still cold. Everything here is cold. But the lack of draft makes this little corner feel almost cozy. You imagine someone centuries ago sitting here just like you, soaking in a tiny patch of calm, grateful for the small mercy of wind-free light. The torch behind you crackles gently. The glass gleams. The castle breathes its chilly breath around you. You sit there for another moment, letting the dim glow settle in your mind. Then you rise from the bench, gently stretch your fingers, and step back toward the corridor. It's time to keep moving. There are more rooms waiting for you, colder ones, darker ones, and maybe even a place to sleep, if medieval sleep comfort can be called comfort at all. You follow the corridor to a quieter part of the castle where the torches burn lower and the air takes on that faint, somebody did chores here earlier scent. The hallway narrows, then opens into a chamber that looks promising. Promising in the sense that it contains a bed, which at this point feels like the medieval equivalent of striking gold. You step inside, letting your eyes adjust to the dim glow from a single candle sputtering on a wooden chest. The flame wobbles dramatically, doing its best impression of a nightlight with stage fright. The room is small, rectangular, and made entirely of stone, of course. Every surface radiates cold like it has a personal vendetta. A draft wanders lazily around the floor, making your cloak ripple at the hem. But your attention is glued to the bed in the center of the room. If bed is the correct word for this lumpy collection of medieval sleep hazards. You approach slowly, as if the bed might sense your optimism and decide to disappoint you on purpose. The frame is sturdy enough, wooden, slightly uneven, creaking faintly when you poke it with one finger. But it's the mattress that draws your full attention, a large, uneven sack stuffed with straw, real straw, the kind that crinkles when you breathe on it. You sit on the edge, and the mattress responds with a symphony of crunches. The surface feels like lying on a half-deflated beanbag filled with cornflakes. You shift slightly, and the entire bed rearranges itself in a series of rustling murmurs. Comfort? Debatable? Authentic? Extremely. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Straw mattresses were absolutely the norm for most castle residents. Nobles got wool or feather-stuffed options if they were lucky, but straw remained the MVP of medieval bedding for centuries. And while it wasn't terrible at first, the straw had to be replaced constantly. Otherwise, it got damp, moldy, or infested with unwelcome roommates. Speaking of roommates, you lift the corner of the blanket, a heavy woolen thing that looks warm until you touch it. The wool is scratchy, thick, and faintly itchy, like a determined sweater that refuses to be ignored. A musty scent wafts upward, not unpleasant but definitely seasoned with age. You gently flop the blanket back into place and notice the bed curtains hanging from a simple wooden frame above. They're made of tightly woven fabric and look surprisingly fancy compared to everything else in the room. You tug one curtain closed. It swings easily, enveloping you in a tiny cocoon of dimness. The curtain smells like old lavender mixed with something you can't quite place. Possibly dust, possibly history, possibly both. You stand inside the curtain circle for a moment, appreciating the slight reduction in draft. Bed curtains weren't about privacy. They were medieval insulation, the sleep equivalent of climbing inside a blanket fort. A quirky tidbit for you. Some bed curtains were embroidered on the inside so that the sleeper had something pleasant to look at before dozing off. Your curtain, unfortunately, is unadorned, just plain fabric, very medieval minimalist chic. You step out from behind it and run your hand along the bed frame. The wood is cool, carved with simple patterns, flowers maybe, or stars. You trace the shapes lightly, imagining someone carving them centuries ago, perhaps on a winter night, just as chilly as this one. You sit again on the bed, letting it rustle beneath you like a bag of sleepy grass. You lie back slowly, and immediately the faintest ping of discomfort radiates from your shoulder, then your hip, then your lower back. The straw shifts around but never quite settles where you want it. You adjust your position, another rustle, another prickly jab. You sigh softly. Medieval ergonomics were definitely not designed by chiropractors. As you lie there, the ceiling looms above, wooden beams supporting the stone above. You watch the candle flicker against the beams, casting quivering shadows that stretch and shrink like sleepy fingers. The quiet hum of the castle settles over you, distant footsteps, the murmur of wind, and the occasional drip of water somewhere deep in the walls. Castles weren't silent at night. They whispered constantly, full of tiny noises that reminded you the structure was alive in its own strange way. Something taps lightly against the wall near the head of the bed. You freeze. Another tap. Then a soft, scuttling sound. Your imagination flares. You picture a tiny, ancient ghost practicing tap dance. But no, it's probably a mouse, or bedbugs, or fleas. You shudder slightly, because here comes your required itchy reality check. Pests were as common in castle bedding as drafts were in corridors. People did their best. They changed straw, beat mattresses with sticks, used herbs, but the critters were persistent. Here's your fun debate point. Historians still argue whether medieval people became desensitized to bed bugs and fleas, or whether they were constantly irritated and just didn't write about it. Based on your current experience, you vote constantly irritated. You laugh softly at your own twitchy vigilance and sit back up. The candle flickers as if laughing along. You reach out and touch the wool blanket again. It's dense, rough, but warm when you gather it in your hands. You pull it around your shoulders and instantly feel heavier, grounded, wrapped in a kind of scratchy embrace. It's strangely comforting, even if your modern skin is already filing a complaint about the texture. You stand and walk to the corner where a simple wooden chest sits. The chest creaks when you open it, revealing extra bedding folded neatly, more coarse blankets, and an additional pillow. The pillow looks promising until you squeeze it. It feels like someone stuffed it with a mix of feathers, twigs, and existential disappointment. You put it back gently. You explore the room a bit more. A small wooden stool sits near the wall. Beside it is a wash basin made of hammered metal, cold enough to make you flinch when you brush your fingers against it. A jug of water waits next to it, likely frigid. You shake your head. Not a good moment for hand washing. The window in this room, if you can call it that, is tiny. Just a square opening covered by a shutter that's been latched from the inside. You lift the latch just enough to peek. A needle of cold air shoots in like it's been holding a grudge. You slam the shutter shut again, whispering a forceful little nope. You return to the bed, pulling the curtain closed behind you once more. Inside, the air feels stiller, warmer. You lie down, letting the straw settle around your weight. The wool blanket lies heavy across your chest. The candle outside the curtain flickers, sending a thin glow through the fabric. You listen to the faint murmur of wind beyond the shutter and imagine yourself falling asleep in this room centuries ago. Maybe with extra blankets. Maybe wearing 3 layers of wool. Maybe with a sleepy dog curled at your feet. You breathe in slowly, letting the scratchy blanket soften against your skin just for a moment before you rise again. You're not done exploring yet. The castle has more discomfort to offer, more charm too, more cold, certainly, but also more stories. And so you slip out of the bed curtain, feet meeting the cold floor once again, ready to wander deeper into the fortress. You step back into the corridor, bracing yourself against another wave of castle chill, though you quickly discover that the cold here is nothing compared to what's waiting in the next part of your journey. You notice a narrow passage branching off to the right, sloping downward in a way that feels both ominous and inevitable, like the castle is gently whispering, "This way, if you dare." You follow it anyway, because you, brave soul, are about to face one of medieval life's most humbling experiences, the castle bathroom. The passage tightens, the ceiling lowering just enough to make you duck slightly. The air grows colder, somehow sharper, and carries a faint scent that triggers a cautious raise of your eyebrows. Not terrible, but suspicious. The torchlight dims as the walls contract around you, and just ahead you spot a small wooden door set into the stone. Its iron latch is simple, its hinges rusted, and its overall aesthetic screams, "Welcome to the garderobe! Abandon hope, ye who hold high expectations." You push the door open gently, and the smell that greets you is unmistakably medieval. Not horrific, not ruin your life awful, but absolutely a scent with a personality, earthy, damp, sharp around the edges. You step inside, and instantly a gust of icy wind slashes across your legs. Oh yes, this bathroom has airflow, more airflow than luxury, more airflow than dignity. The room itself is small, maybe the size of a modern walk-in closet, with stone walls on 3 sides and a rectangular opening carved into the 4th wall. Below that opening is the main feature, a simple wooden plank with a hole cut into it, suspended over a dark void. The medieval toilet, elegant, practical, and brimming with draft-based character. You approach it cautiously, half expecting someone to jump scare you from the depths below, but thankfully, it's empty. Well, empty of people. The hole yawns open like an eye that's seen too much. A faint whistle rises from the darkness, wind rushing up from the castle's outer wall. You shiver instantly. Congratulations, you've discovered that using the toilet in a castle was essentially sitting on a stone balcony, but significantly less glamorous. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Castle garderobes were often built into exterior walls, allowing waste to fall down into pits, moats, or sometimes directly onto the ground, far below. No plumbing, no flushing, just gravity, efficiency, and a very forgiving relationship with hygiene standards. You lean slightly over the hole, not too far, because gravity is real, and you're not about to become medieval history's weirdest statistic. You can see a sliver of moonlight down the chute, illuminating frost on the stones. The cold rising from it makes you rethink every complaint you've ever had about modern bathrooms being too chilly. A blast of wind rushes upward again, puffing your cloak like you're backstage at a fashion show where the theme is Arctic night chic. You step back, clutching the edges of your cloak dramatically and making a face that would earn applause from any audience familiar with uncomfortable bathroom experiences. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some medieval people believed garderobe chutes helped keep evil spirits away, the way chimneys supposedly helped Santa. Not that they ever phrased it quite that charmingly. The idea was that the rising drafts and the constant vertical space would deter malevolent forces. You glance at the gaping hole again. Honestly, it feels more likely to launch you into a life of trauma than protect you from spirits. But you appreciate the optimistic logic. You turn to study the walls. One section has a few carved scratches, doodles left by centuries of bored or freezing bathroom visitors. One drawing looks like a horse. Another, maybe a fish, or a very poorly carved knight. You smile because bathroom graffiti, it seems, is an ancient human tradition. To the left of the toilet plank sits a shallow stone shelf. You find a stack of what appears to be cloth scraps, rough, stiff, and definitely recycled. Toilet paper wasn't a luxury most people knew. Moss, straw, rags. Creativity was key. You offer a small sympathetic salute to anyone who had to make choices in this room before you. As you explore the tiny chamber, you catch another icy draft swooping under the door and swirling around your ankles. You cross your arms tightly, resisting the urge to mutter about how this room makes your bones feel like they're filing formal complaints. Historians still argue whether garderobes were cleaner than we imagine or far more disastrous. Some say the constant airflow kept smells minimal. Others say the pits created bacterial nightmares. But they all agree on one thing. These rooms were freezing. Absolutely, aggressively freezing. You step closer to the window carved into the wall above the chute. It's just a gap, really, open to the outside. You put your hand near it and instantly feel the full strength of the night wind, like a cold breath from the castle's lungs. In summer, maybe this airflow would be refreshing. In winter, it's a punishment. A small wooden bar sits across the opening, perhaps to keep people from falling through, or to keep animals from climbing in. You lean toward it, imagining a medieval noble sitting here in layers of wool, negotiating both their personal dignity and the ambient temperature. You mutter, "No wonder kings had short tempers," and the wind whistles through the opening in agreement. You take one last look around the garderobe, committing the sensory experience to memory. The scratchy wooden seat, the swirling drafts, the faint torchlight bouncing off damp stone. You are humble. You are cold. You are grateful for modern plumbing in a deeply spiritual way. You step back into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind you. The temperature outside feels almost warm by comparison. Almost. The castle continues stretching forward in dim corridors and creaking stairs, and you're ready to follow wherever this cold, quirky fortress leads next. You continue down the corridor, your footsteps soft against the cold stone, and soon a familiar scent begins to drift toward you. Warm spices, simmering broth, roasted something or other. Your stomach gives a tiny, hopeful rumble. After the emotional journey of the garderobe, you deserve a reward, or at least a slight improvement in quality of life. You follow the aromas until you reach an arched doorway leading into a bustling space lit by firelight. Welcome to the castle kitchen, the medieval heart of culinary chaos. The heat hits you first. Not cozy warmth, no. This is the heat of a room fighting for its life against weak fires, boiling pots, and the perpetual chill of stone walls. It's warm compared to the hallway, which instantly earns it hero status. You step inside, your senses soaking in the flames, dancing under iron cauldrons, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, and the quiet muttering of cooks who've clearly been awake much longer than you have. The kitchen is alive. There's a steady hum, crackling fires, bubbling stews, the scrape of wooden spoons, and the occasional clang of a dropped ladle. You inhale deeply, letting the scent wrap around you. It's hearty, earthy, and slightly smoky. Exactly what you imagine when someone says medieval food, with perhaps a tiny dash of, "Don't ask what that extra smell is." A long wooden table dominates the center of the room, piled high with ingredients, leeks, onions, turnips, and roots of every shape. A chicken plucked down to its last feather sits on a board, looking offended posthumously. A basket of stale bread looms nearby, destined to become either stew thickener or a weapon. You're undecided. You drift closer to one of the cooks, a sturdy woman expertly chopping vegetables with a knife that has clearly seen battle. She glances up at you with a look that says, "If you're not here to help stir something, stand back and don't get in the way." You step to the side immediately, respecting her authority. A large cauldron boils on the main hearth, steam rising in thick clouds. You lean over it, inhaling deeply. The stew inside looks beige, a beige that promises warmth and sustenance, even if it doesn't promise excitement. Medieval cuisine wasn't exactly famous for bold flavors. It was famous for not killing you. That's the bar, and honestly, that's fair. Here's your mainstream historical fact. For this section, water wasn't always safe to drink in medieval Europe, especially in dense communities, so people tended to drink ale, weak beer, or watered wine at meals, even children. Food poisoning was a real danger, and boiling stew for hours, sometimes days, helped kill off anything unwanted. You peer into the cauldron again and decide that bland but safe is an underappreciated culinary category. Near the fire, two men are tending a spit with what looks like a roasted joint of meat. You can't identify the exact animal. Could be mutton, could be pork, could be whatever was available today. The smell is rich and mouth-watering, though you can already tell the meat won't be piping hot when served. Castle kitchens prepared food far from the great hall, so by the time dishes made the journey upstairs, they usually arrived somewhere between warmish and hope you enjoy room temperature. A luxury, truly. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some households used trenchers, hollowed out stale bread slabs, as plates. The bread soaked up sauces and juices, becoming edible bowls. And if the diners didn't want them afterward, servants or dogs did. Zero waste, maximum efficiency. You glance around the kitchen and spot a pile of these bread plates waiting to be used. They look sturdy enough to survive a minor siege. You walk past the hearth and feel the heat intensify. Sweat beads on your forehead, instantly freezing the moment you drift too far from the fire's glow. Cold heat, cold heat. It's a whole medieval cardio routine. You step closer to a small side table where dried herbs hang from rafters above, filling the air with a surprisingly pleasant aroma. Sage, thyme, rosemary, and something that might be mint but also might be an herb only medieval people recognized. You run your fingers gently across a hanging bundle, feeling the crisp leaves crumble slightly. A young kitchen boy rushes past you with a tray of pewter cups. You nearly collide, and he executes a surprisingly nimble sidestep. "Careful," he mutters, racing on. You marvel at his agility. The castle kitchen is the medieval equivalent of a high-intensity obstacle course, and he's clearly mastered it. Another servant carries a massive loaf of dark bread toward a chopping block. He slices it with a sawing motion, each cut releasing a soft, grainy smell. You reach out, touch the loaf. It's dense, coarse, and would absolutely dent a helmet if thrown with enthusiasm. You tuck that observation away for future use, or just a sleepy chuckle. You take a seat on a wobbly bench near the wall, letting your body relax as the heat from the hearth reaches you in gentle waves. A bowl of stew is set on the table beside you, a generous portion steaming faintly. You pick it up and blow on it. The warmth seeps into your hands. You take a cautious sip. The flavor is mild but comforting. Onion, turnip, maybe a hint of something leafy. You chew thoughtfully, appreciating how even this simple dish feels like balm after wandering through frigid halls. You glance around the room at the bustling cooks and think of a common medieval dining custom. During feasts, bones, shells, and scraps were often tossed directly onto the floor to be swept up later. You look at the rush-strewn floor beneath your boots. Yep, this is the place where that happens. Historians still argue whether castle kitchens were chaotic nightmares or well-organized production lines. Some say they ran like clockwork, efficient, productive, constantly feeding dozens. Others point out the fires, the smoke, the inconsistent heat, the lack of hygiene, and call it organized chaos at best. Watching the scene now, you'd say it's both. Somehow messy and masterfully orchestrated. You take another spoonful of stew and savor the warmth. It spreads through your chest, relaxing you like a slow exhale. A dog, your castle companion, wanders in again, drawn by the scent of roasting meat. He gives you a hopeful look. You slip him a piece of bread crust. He accepts it with the politeness of a creature who knows dishes aren't always guaranteed. As you finish eating, the kitchen begins to quiet. Some servants tidy up, others bank the fires for the night. You place your empty bowl on the table and rise from the bench, stretching your stiff legs. The warmth has seeped into your bones, just enough to make the next steps feel manageable. You walk toward the doorway, taking one last look at the flicker of kitchen flames, the hanging herbs, the busy hands preparing tomorrow's meals. There's something comforting about it all, despite the cold, despite the chaos, despite the lukewarm stew. You step back into the corridor. The cold greets you instantly, wrapping you in a brisk reminder of castle realities. But now you're fed, warmed, and ready to face whatever sounds and shadows await you in the castle after dark. You take a few steady breaths as you move away from the warmth of the kitchen, letting the last traces of heat fade from your fingertips while the castle reclaims your body temperature like a tax collector with no mercy. The corridor stretches ahead in a long, dim ribbon, lit only by the occasional torch sputtering along the wall. Their flames flicker erratically, casting jumpy shadows that make every corner of the hallway look like it's hiding a secret. Or worse, a sound. Because in a medieval castle, night isn't quiet. Not at all. You take another step, and the first noise arrives right on cue. A distant clang, metal on metal. You freeze, waiting. Another clang, followed by a muted murmur. Right. That would be the night guards switching shifts or settling into their rounds. The echo stretches unnaturally through the long stone tunnels, bouncing along the walls in a way that makes it hard to tell how far away they actually are. Could be 10 feet, could be 10 rooms. The acoustics here are dramatic like that. You continue forward, and the silence between each sound grows thicker, softer, like the castle itself is wrapping you in a chilly blanket of suspense. You reach a stairway and start climbing, the steps uneven and worn smooth by centuries of people with better night vision than you currently have. Halfway up, another sound brushes your ear, a low creak somewhere above. A door opening, a door closing, or just the wood beam shifting with the night wind. A cold draft swirls down the staircase as if answering your internal question. You pull your cloak tighter, suddenly aware of how loud your own footsteps feel in the hush. You exhale slowly. Your breath forms a faint cloud, and then another sound, a soft shuffle ahead. You pause at the top of the stairs, peering into the gloom. A long hallway stretches before you, illuminated by moonlight, leaking in from a few slits along the wall. Something moves across the far end, quick, silent, definitely not a ghost, even though your imagination tries very hard to make it one. As the figure draws closer, you see the familiar outline of a guard pacing the passage. He nods as he passes, offering a weary look that says, "This is my job. Your job is to not jump when you hear noises." You give him a polite, slightly embarrassed nod back. Night guard duty, of course, was essential in medieval castles. That's your historical fact here. Guards patrolled corridors constantly, watching for fires, thieves, unrest, stray animals, and the occasional noble wandering for a late-night thought break. Their boots, armor, and torchlight were some of the most familiar nighttime sounds for castle residents. You follow the soft echo of the guard's footsteps until it fades, swallowed by the stone. Another sound rises in its place, a faint tap, tap, tap. Light, quick, rhythmic. You turn to your right. A wooden shutter somewhere along the wall is rattling gently, probably teased by the wind tunneling through some crack or half-forgotten vent shaft. You walk past it, gently pressing the shutter with your hand. It quiets for a moment, then clacks again as soon as you step away. You mutter a sleepy complaint under your breath, something like, "Please respect the vibe, little window." It ignores you because of course it does. You venture deeper into the corridor, and the atmosphere subtly shifts. The air gets stiller, quieter. Then another noise, this time a soft scraping like claws or small feet. You pause, listening. The sound repeats, scrape, scrape, shuffle. You lift one eyebrow. You remember your earlier bed encounters and think, ah, yes, the castle wildlife. A small shadow darts across the floor in front of you. You jump slightly, not dramatically, just enough to keep your dignity. Then you spot it, a mouse, whiskers twitching, tail flicking, scurrying confidently across the hallway. He pauses, looks at you, then trots onward like he fully owns the place. You whisper, "Good evening, Sir Mouse," and continue walking. But the castle isn't done with its bedtime orchestra. A soft thud comes from behind a door. You glance at it cautiously. Probably just a servant going about late-night tasks. Or someone dropping a jug, or a cat having opinions. You walk past quietly. Then a new sound emerges, low, drawn out, and echoing faintly through the stone. Ooh. You stop cold. The hairs on your arm stand at full attention. The noise drifts again, haunting, eerie, and very much in the "is this castle haunted" category. You hold your breath. A moment later, the sound resolves into something more mundane. A cow from the courtyard, mooing through the night breeze as the echo distorts its voice. You let out a long, shaky sigh. Quirky tidbit for this section, farm animals were commonly kept inside castle walls for security, and their nighttime noises often echoed through stone passages, leading to many reports of spirits or mysterious wails. You roll your eyes at the cow ghost, but affectionately. You turn down another hallway and feel the temperature drop again. This corridor is narrower, more cramped, and the shadows seem to cling to the corners. You hear the faint creak of a floorboard somewhere, odd because the floor is mostly stone. You piece together the explanation, wooden lofts or beams shifting under their own weight, reacting to temperature changes. The castle breathes at night. It settles. It speaks in creaks and groans. Historians still argue whether these sounds were comforting or unsettling for medieval residents. Some say people grew accustomed to them. Others believe the noises inspired endless superstitions and ghost stories. You know which side you're leaning toward after that cow ghost moment. You reach another room, a small alcove with a bench and a narrow glassless window. Moonlight spills in, pale and cold. You step inside and sit for a moment, listening. The castle's nighttime rhythm continues, distant boots, soft gusts of wind, a drip somewhere, a clatter far below, a whisper of shifting stones. It's oddly soothing in a "this building is definitely alive" sort of way. You close your eyes briefly, imagining medieval nights just like this. Servants finishing chores, guards pacing, animals grunting softly, wind swirling through every crack. And people, like you, trying to sleep in a fortress that can't help making noise. After a few more quiet breaths, you stand and leave the alcove. The corridor opens ahead, lit by the faint glow of moonlight and torch embers, and the castle's night chorus follows you as you move deeper into its shadowy heart. You move deeper into the castle, following a corridor that angles downward in a slow, unsettling slope. The air grows heavier as you descend, the humidity rising just enough to hint that you're entering a part of the fortress where the stone likes to stay damp. And so do the creatures who live here rent-free. Your footsteps echo softly, and something about the sound makes you slow your pace. Maybe it's the way the echoes overlap, like there's more than one person walking. Maybe it's the faint scratch from somewhere ahead. Or maybe it's just the unmistakable truth settling in. You've arrived at the part of castle life nobody romanticizes: the pests, the plagues, the uninvited roommates. A torch flickers at the end of the corridor, barely illuminating the next chamber. When you step inside, the temperature dips again, softly at first, like a warning. A few barrels sit against the far wall, lids tied down with rope. You approach one and gently tap it. The wood vibrates. Something inside shifts very faintly. You freeze. Surely that was just your imagination. You lean closer and hear it. A tiny scuffle. Very tiny. Very alive. You take one polite step back because you're not about to open a medieval barrel like it's a loot crate in a video game. This is real life, and real life is full of rodents who do not care about your sleep schedule. You glance around and spot the first flicker of movement near the wall. A small brown mouse darts from one crack to another, fast as a blink. You follow it with your eyes, and then you notice another, and another. And then a pair of glittering eyes that definitely don't belong to a mouse. A cat emerges from the shadows, tail swishing with the confidence of a full-time rodent management professional. She pauses to give you the "don't mess up my workflow" look. You step aside respectfully. She flicks her ear and slinks into another crack in the wall like a furry assassin. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Pest control in medieval castles was essentially hope a cat lives here. Cats were beloved for their hunting skills, even if they sometimes knocked over important things or decided to yell at 3 a.m. You imagine this cat doing exactly that, screaming her tiny head off while guards pretend not to hear. You wander around the room slowly, letting your eyes adjust. The walls have dark streaks on them, water stains that run down like long tears. The stone sweats in winter, which creates perfect conditions for things that prefer damp corners. As if on cue, you hear a faint rustling. You turn your head. A cluster of straw in the corner wiggles suspiciously. You take a single step toward it, mustering your courage. The straw rustles again, and a beetle emerges, large enough to require its own name and tax bracket. You whisper, "Okay, nope," and breathe out slowly. You don't kill it. This is its castle, clearly, but you do mentally add medieval bugs to your list of sleep story obstacles. You step back, sliding your hand along the wall as you continue exploring the chamber. The stone feels colder here, like it's storing the memory of every wet winter that's ever passed. You notice a wooden beam overhead, damp on one side. A drip falls from it, plinking onto the floor like a tiny metronome keeping time with your heartbeat. The scratch you heard earlier returns, clearer now. You turn, and your torchlight catches two small shapes scurrying across a ledge. Rats, not huge, but definitely not the kind you'd want to see while drifting off to sleep. They disappear into a hole as quickly as they appeared. Your inner voice whispers, "It's fine, they're normal, part of the ecosystem." But your outer voice hums a nervous note just to remind the universe you're a fragile creature. You move on, trying to focus on the softer sounds, wind humming through distant vents, the cat's faint meow, the creak of old beams settling. But then something else catches your attention. A long wooden chest pushed against the wall. Its lid is cracked open just enough to reveal a pile of folded cloth. You step closer and realize the fabric isn't stored. It's abandoned. Blankets, linens, old, worn, and piled like someone intended to clean them and then encountered a reason not to. A chill crawls up your spine. Not the cold kind. There might be fleas in their kind. And here's your quirky tidbit. Fleas weren't just annoying. They were everywhere. They thrived in bedding, rushes, clothing, animal fur, pretty much any warm nook. Medieval people filled their mattresses with herbs to keep pests away. Lavender, rosemary, mint. But the fleas simply considered these flavored mattresses. You lean down cautiously, holding your breath. You spot a few dark specks on the top cloth. You immediately straighten up so fast, you create your own breeze. Those specks don't move, but you give them a respectful 3-foot radius anyway. You back away and continue down the length of the room until you reach another doorway. Beyond it is a long gallery that runs parallel to the outer wall. The moonlight spills through a series of windows, striping the floor in cold silver. You walk along it, listening to your own footsteps. Something rustles in the thatched ceiling above. You don't want to know what. Probably birds settling in, or bats waking up, or something that historians delicately call fauna. Historians still argue whether castles had dedicated pest management strategies or if people simply coexisted with the wildlife. Some evidence suggests regular cleaning routines. Other sources imply people shrugged and said, it's part of life. You suspect the truth leans somewhere in the middle, and based on this corridor's ceiling activity, somewhere in the loud middle. You keep walking and reach a small storage niche carved into the wall. Inside sit sacks of grain stacked neatly. You hear a soft shuffle inside one of them. A mouse pokes its head out, cheeks full. You blink. It blinks. Then it dives back in with zero shame. The cat from earlier appears beside you, leaping gracefully toward the sack with lightning reflexes. The mouse squeals, exits through a tear, and disappears down a crack. The cat follows like a tiny, furry superhero. You cheer for her in a whisper. You lean against the wall again, letting the cold stone touch your back. The castle hums around you, alive with creatures, alive with history, alive with a messiness that no fairy tale ever mentions. And yet, there's something weirdly comforting about it. Something real, something human. You push away from the wall and take one last look around. The pests, the shadows, the tiny echoes, they were all part of medieval life. Not glamorous, definitely not hygienic, but undeniably authentic. You turn, stepping back into the corridor, ready for the next chapter of your chilly, creaky, slightly scratchy castle journey. You climb a narrow flight of stairs, feeling the air grow colder with each step, as though the castle itself is warning you. Winter is coming inside. By the time you reach the next landing, the temperature has dropped so sharply that your breath frosts in front of your face like a little ghost companion. You wave it away gently, but it returns immediately, as persistent as the drafts in this ancient fortress. You step into a long, echoing passageway that runs along the inner wall. A pair of torches flickers weakly, their flames tiny and strained, fighting desperately against the darkness and losing. You wrap your cloak tighter, pulling it around your shoulders until you resemble a medieval burrito, and begin walking slowly, letting your fingers graze the stone wall. The chill sinks right into your bones. It's the kind of cold that feels like it's whispering, "Why did you leave your warm bed?" Winter inside a castle wasn't a season, it was an occupation. You continue forward, sensing the air thick with the memory of countless freezing nights. The corridor widens slightly as you approach a small archway leading into a room that looks like it was meant to be cozy, but has ultimately lost the battle. This must have been a sitting chamber, perhaps used for weaving, mending clothes, or talking quietly by a fire, assuming the fire ever cooperated. Inside, a single brazier glows faintly. Not flames, just glowing coals that look like they're clinging to their last ounce of enthusiasm. You approach it, hands extended, and feel a tiny pulse of warmth reach your palms. It's the medieval equivalent of standing near your phone charger when the battery is at 1%. A moment of hope, but one you don't fully trust. You pull up a wobbly wooden stool and sit near the brazier, listening to the faint pop of a coal shifting. The warmth is fragile and fleeting, like a shy animal that darts away the second you move too abruptly. You breathe slowly, watching the steam drift from your lips. Here's your mainstream historical fact. People in medieval Europe relied heavily on layers, lots of them, to survive winter indoors. Linen shifts under wool tunics, under cloaks, under fur mantles, and still, fingers and toes went numb. The cold in a stone structure is relentless. The walls soak it up like sponges and then leak it back into the air day and night. You stand and wander toward a nearby window. The shutter is closed, but the cold slips through the cracks with the persistence of someone trying to sneak into a party they weren't invited to. You rest your hand against the wood. It's frosty. You imagine someone sitting here centuries ago, shivering just like you, whispering complaints into their wool scarf. You offer them a quiet, sleepy, "Same?" Next to the window is a basket containing a pile of woolen clothing, tunics, shawls, maybe some gloves. You pick one up and examine it. The wool is thick, coarse, scratchy enough to exfoliate your arms into next week, but warm, very warm. You drape it over your shoulders and immediately feel a slight improvement. You mutter, "Fashion takes sacrifices," and continue your exploration. A small loom sits in the far corner, half covered with cloth. Threads stretch across it like frozen strands of spider silk. You touch them. They're cold enough to sting. You imagine someone weaving here, fingers stiff, breath fogging the air, determined to finish clothing for the household. You take a quiet moment to appreciate their dedication, because weaving in these conditions feels like a sport for only the bravest. You head toward a door at the far side of the room. The latch squeaks when you push it open, revealing a staircase spiraling upward. The moment you take the first step, a colder breeze sweeps down the stairwell, making your cloak ripple like a flag of surrender. Still, you push on, each step making your breath puff faster. At the top, you emerge into an upper hallway where tapestries hang along the walls. They're thick, layers of woven stories showing knights, forests, mythical beasts. You run your hand over one. The threads feel rough, but the fabric blocks the draft well. That's the quirky tidbit for this section. Tapestries weren't just decoration. They were insulation, functioning like giant medieval blankets pinned to walls. Without them, a castle's winter interior would feel like the inside of a snow cave. You continue walking and eventually find yourself in a chamber with a large stone fireplace. It's empty, dark, and colder than everywhere else you've been tonight. You crouch in front of it, imagining what it would be like when lit. fire roaring, heat swirling upward, people crowding around for warmth. But right now, it's an icy museum exhibit of disappointment. A few logs wait near the hearth. You pick one up and feel the dampness seeping into your palm. No wonder fires here struggle. A servant enters the room quietly, carrying kindling. You watch her set it down, blow on her hands, and disappear again with a weary sigh. Everyone in this castle is cold. All the time, it's a universal truth. You sit on a cushioned bench, though cushioned is generous. The fabric is stiff, the stuffing uneven, but it lifts you slightly off the freezing stone floor, which feels like a blessing. You stretch your legs out and let your back rest against the wall. The bench creaks. The wall is freezing. You endure both. A strange sound drifts from outside the shuttered window, wind whistling, then almost humming. It reminds you of a faraway song, eerie but soft. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over you. It's peaceful, oddly enough. Cold, yes, but peaceful. Then your brain decides to be dramatic and whispers, "What if it's a ghost?" You open your eyes again quickly. Historians still argue whether people in medieval castles suffered endlessly in winter or simply accepted the cold as a normal part of life. Some say the household adapted, huddling together, setting up beds near fires, drinking warm ale. Others say the cold caused constant discomfort, chronic illness, and miserable nights. Sitting here now, holding your cloak tighter, you suspect they were cold a lot more often than they admitted. You rise from the bench and explore a bit more. A wooden chest sits in one corner. You open it and find more winter gear, fur-lined cloaks, extra blankets, and what looked like the medieval equivalent of giant wool socks. You laugh softly. Someone in this castle was hoarding warmth supplies like a tiny winter dragon. You drape one of the fur cloaks around your shoulders. It smells like old smoke in colder seasons, but it's warm and heavy. The fabric settles against your body with comforting weight. You breathe out slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your arms. Then, just as you begin to relax into the winter quiet, a loud bang echoes through the hallway outside. You jump. The fur cloak nearly slips off. You rush to the door and crack it open. A shutter somewhere down the hall has blown open from the wind, slamming repeatedly against the wall. You mutter, "Of course," and step out to close it. It takes effort. The wind pushes back like an annoyed giant, but eventually you latch it shut. The hallway grows quieter instantly. You stand there for a moment, cloak wrapped tight, surrounded by the thick stillness of winter air inside ancient stone. You take a soft breath, and it fogs in front of you like a tiny silver cloud drifting upward. Time to keep walking. The castle is still waiting. You continue down the hallway, the fur cloak still wrapped around your shoulders like a loyal, slightly damp companion. The air shifts again, not colder, not warmer, but tense. You can feel it before you understand it. Something about the castle's atmosphere has changed. The faint background hum of ordinary castle life, the clatter of pots, the occasional guard's footsteps, the rustle of straw, fades into a muffled stillness. You pause mid-stride, tilting your head. Your breath curls into the air, then vanishes, and in that quiet moment, you realize what's happening. The castle has entered siege mode, or at least the medieval version of battening down the hatches. The air feels compressed, heavy with collective breath, as though the walls are holding tension just as tightly as the people inside them. You step forward slowly, and the hallway seems darker than it should be. Fewer torches, lower flames, Even the drafts feel more cautious, slipping around your ankles like they're sneaking somewhere they shouldn't be. You turn down a stairwell and descend toward the lower chambers where people often gathered during times of danger. The steps echo softly beneath you, and the castle's stone feels colder, not from winter this time, but from worry. A wooden door creaks open as you reach the bottom landing, revealing a broad storage room repurposed as a temporary shelter. Straw mats line the floor. Barrels of grain stack against the walls. Several families huddle together in cloaks, talking in low voices, sharing what warmth they can. A few children peek over blankets, eyes wide with curiosity, and maybe a bit of fear. You nod gently at them, a soft reassurance, though your heart gives a sympathetic squeeze. Siege life wasn't glamorous. Most of it was waiting and trying to stretch supplies like they were elastic. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Castles rarely fell quickly. Sieges could last weeks or months, forcing residents to ration food, restrict fires to conserve fuel, and sleep in cramped communal spaces. Hygiene dropped, tempers rose, and comfort evaporated like mist. A servant hurries past you carrying a bucket of water. Stale water from a storage cistern, you guess. She sets it down near the wall, then moves on with the dazed efficiency of someone who has done this all day and will do it again all night. You wander toward a corner where a group of people sits around a brazier. The coals glow soft orange, giving off just enough warmth to take the edge off the chill. You join them, easing yourself down onto a straw mat. A few nod in your direction, welcoming but quiet. The glow flickers across their tired faces. Someone hands you a bowl, thin porridge, barely warm, more texture than flavor. You take a cautious sip. It's simple, but in times like this, nourishment is the only priority. You murmur a quiet thank you, and the woman beside you smiles faintly before turning back toward the fire. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind, soft as a whispered aside. In long sieges, people sometimes roasted shoe leather or boiled parchment for calories when food ran low. That's one of those facts you'd prefer to forget while holding a bowl of porridge. But your brain offers it anyway, like an unwanted bonus track. As you eat, a distant thud shakes the stones beneath you, a muffled boom from outside the walls. You pause mid-bite. Everyone else does too. A tense silence spreads, so thick you could wrap it around your shoulders like another cloak. The next moment, a guard appears in the doorway, calling something to the steward. You can't make out the words, but the tone says, "Everything is still fine," with the confidence of someone trying to convince themselves. You finish the porridge quietly, hand the bowl back, and rise slowly to explore the rest of the room. The lanterns here are dim, each flame trimmed deliberately short to save oil. Shadows stretch across the floor, weaving between barrels and baskets like slow-moving specters. You step into another chamber, smaller than the first, where a few people have taken shelter near the wall. Tools and storage crates sit stacked around them. The air feels even staler here, as if all the windows have been sealed to keep the cold and danger out. You inhale and feel the closeness settle into your lungs. No breeze, no draft, just stillness. Historians still argue whether sealed chambers during sieges were safer or harmful. On one hand, fewer openings meant fewer weak points. On the other, poor ventilation meant smoke, smells, and stale air built up. You can imagine both sides having very valid complaints. A child begins to fuss quietly, tugging at her mother's sleeve. The woman pulls a small carved wooden toy from her cloak, shaped like a horse, and hands it to her. The child smiles instantly, tapping it gently against her knee. You watch the simple moment with soft reassurance. Even in a fortress under stress, some tiny comforts survive. You wander to the far wall where a narrow slit window sits higher than you can reach. The torchlight barely touches it. You stand beneath it and tilt your head, listening. A faint howl of wind snakes through the seam. Not a normal draft, this one is sharp and intermittent, like pressure outside is shifting. You step back. Siege weather feels different, even inside. A loud creak above you makes you flinch. Probably just the keep beam settling, but your heart jumps anyway. You rub your arms briskly and rejoin the main chamber, where the brazier still flickers gently. The straw beneath your feet crackles softly. You walk toward the doorway, listening to the hushed voices, the occasional cough, the sigh of someone shifting their weight. You catch a phrase from a nearby conversation, something about rationing bread starting tomorrow. Another voice mentions that the well water had a strange taste today. You suppress a frown. You climb the stairs again, returning to the upper floors. The air grows colder, fresher, but no less heavy with tension. Somewhere above, a guard paces the ramparts. You can hear his boots striking stone in steady rhythm. You imagine him peering over the battlements at the dark shapes beyond the walls. Waiting armies, winter winds, a night filled with unknowns. You reach a hallway where several doors are closed tight. Thick wooden bars have been dropped across some of them. You run your fingers along a bolt, feeling the cold iron bite your skin. The castle is protecting itself, tightening, sealing, preparing like a living creature tense against harm. You step into a chamber at the end of the hall. It has a tiny window showing only the sliver of a moon through narrow glass. The room is quiet, eerily so. You stand in the calm silence, taking a slow, deep breath. The cold air enters your lungs and feels like resolve. The siege hasn't reached the walls yet, not fully, but you can feel it in the stones, in the hushed voices, in the dim torches. Life inside a castle during siege wasn't violent every moment. It was waiting, waiting through discomfort, waiting through hunger, waiting through fear. You turn away from the window and walk back toward the corridor. The echo of your steps carrying softly into the chilly stillness. The castle continues, and so do you. You stand for a moment in the chilly corridor, fur cloak still wrapped around you, and realize something important. In this castle, everyone is cold. But not everyone is cold in quite the same way. The stone, the drafts, the smoky fires, all of that is shared. But the experience of the castle depends very much on where you fit in its social ladder. So you take a slow breath, fogging the air in front of you, and decide to follow a day, in winter, of course, through 3 sets of eyes: the servant, the knight, and the lord. You start at the bottom, because that's literally where the servants live. You head down a familiar narrow staircase into the lower levels. The air thickens with the scent of stored grain, damp cloth, and the faint tang of overused rushes. At the end of a short passage, you find a chamber full of low pallets, wooden planks with thin straw bedding, crammed tightly together like the world's least comfortable sleepover. This is where the household servants sleep. You pause at the doorway, watching the quiet scene. A few figures bundled in thin blankets, cloaks pulled over their shoulders, boots close by in case they need to leap up at some ungodly pre-dawn bell. There's no fireplace in this room, no brazier, just body heat and hope. You imagine yourself lying on one of these pallets. The straw crunches beneath you, thinner and lumpier than what you felt in your private little room earlier. You'd share this space with several others, plus the occasional mouse, plus the occasional flea, plus whatever drama your co-workers stirred up that day. Privacy? Absolutely not. Snoring? Absolutely yes. Here's your historical fact. For many castle servants, the day started before dawn, stoking kitchen fires, hauling water, sweeping rushes, often after a night of broken sleep in shared, chilly quarters. You look around and notice how close the pallets sit to the door, where the draft from the corridor slides in like an unwelcome extra roommate. One servant stirs, mutters something about the cold, and pulls the blanket tighter. You feel that in your soul. You step quietly back into the corridor and climb upward to find someone higher up the food chain, a knight. On the next level, the air is slightly warmer. Not warm, just less aggressively icy. You find a modest chamber along the outer wall. Inside, a knight's gear hangs neatly along a peg. Chainmail, a helmet, a sword belt neatly looped. A small wooden chest sits at the foot of a bed that is, at first glance, a noticeable upgrade. Thicker mattress, better blanket, and luxury of luxuries, an extra pillow. The knight is not here at the moment, so you wander in like a respectful sleep tourist. You touch the mattress. It's still straw-based, but fuller, better stuffed, less likely to stab you in the ribs every time you move. The blanket is heavy wool, patched in a few spots, but clearly well maintained. A small brazier sits in the corner, not always lit, but available. You sit on the edge of the bed and feel it give just enough to be comfortable. You can almost picture yourself shrugging off armor after a long, freezing day on watch, collapsing here with a sigh that echoes off the stone walls. Knights had status, but their lives weren't exactly spa days. They spent hours in metal armor, stood guard in biting wind, and slept in rooms that were warmer than servants' quarters, but still colder than your average modern garage. Historians still argue whether knights were genuinely privileged in terms of comfort or whether their status just came with better-looking misery. Judging by the chill that still seeps into this room through the window cracks, you suspect it's somewhere in between. You stand and walk toward the tiny window. The shutter is closed, but a narrow slice of light sneaks in through a gap. You press your palm against the wood. Cold, as expected. Near the brazier, you notice a small wooden stool and a half-burned candle. You picture the knight here, late at night, cleaning weapons or mending gear with numb fingers by flickering light. Not exactly the glamorous version from the stories. You spot something else near the bed, a pair of fur-lined gloves. You pick them up and slip your fingers inside. Oh, these are good. They're soft and warm in that I would absolutely steal these and never apologize kind of way. You slide them off reluctantly and place them back where you found them. Time to climb even higher. You head upstairs again, following a corridor with tapestries on the walls and better quality rushes underfoot. The air is still cold, yes, but less brutal, like it's trying to pretend it's been domesticated. At the end of the passage, you reach a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron. A guard stands nearby, and you slip past him, in your imagination at least, into the chambers of the lord or lady of the castle. Immediately, you notice the difference. The room is larger, with several adjoining spaces. The main chamber is dominated by a massive bed raised proudly on a wooden platform. The mattress looks thick enough to swallow smaller beds whole. The bed curtains are rich fabric, wool, or maybe even lined with fur, hanging in generous folds that promise to trap at least a little warmth. You step closer, running your hand along the curtain. It's smoother than the one you tugged earlier in your smaller room. Someone paid good money for this insulation. You poke your head inside the curtain gap. The bed is layered with blankets, quilts, and furs in a thick, cozy-looking mound. You could absolutely disappear in there until spring. You half consider doing exactly that. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some high-status people slept with warming pans, little metal pans filled with hot coals, and slid between the sheets before bed to take the edge off the cold. A medieval preheated mattress. Of course, you had to trust that no one set the entire bed on fire in the process. A risk-reward ratio you're not fully sold on. You notice a proper fireplace in the room. It's not blazing, but there are banked embers glowing quietly, ready to be revived. The hearth is framed with carved stone, and a few logs are stacked neatly nearby. You kneel and extend your hands toward it. Compared to the empty fireplaces and struggling braziers you saw earlier, this one feels practically luxurious. You stand and look around the room. There's a cushioned chair near the hearth, a writing desk with a few scattered quills, and another smaller room beyond, possibly a private chapel or dressing space. Here, privacy actually exists. If the servant quarters were crowded and the knight's room semi-private, this space is unmistakably separate. Doors, curtains, corners, places to be alone with your thoughts and your bed-warming pan. And yet, as you stand there, you still feel the draft seeping under the door. You still see the frost creeping at the edge of the window frame. Nobles had the best of castle comfort, yes, but best is very relative. No central heating, no hot showers, no fluffy slippers waiting by the bed, just better bedding, more fabric, and a fireplace that usually worked. You walk to the window. This one actually has glass. Wavy, imperfect, but undeniably glass. You place your fingertips against it. It's cold, but at least it blocks the wind. The glass distorts the moonlit world outside, turning the courtyard into a dreamy blur. You imagine the lord of the castle standing here at dawn, wrapped in fur, watching smoke rise from the chimneys below. Servants trudging across the courtyard, knights training, stable hands leading horses, everyone sharing the same cold, just from different heights and with different blankets. You step back, letting the heavy bed curtains brush against your arm one more time. They're soft. It's tempting to crawl into that layered mountain of quilts and decide to care about historical accuracy tomorrow. But instead, you turn and head for the door, because now you've seen the full spectrum. Servants shivering in crowded quarters, knights in small, slightly better chambers, lords and ladies in rooms with their own fireplaces and glass windows. Different levels, different spaces, different fabrics. But by the end of a winter day, everyone climbs into bed tired. Everyone hears the same wind moaning around the battlements. Everyone feels the same stone beneath the tapestries, the same drafts sneaking through the cracks, the same long nights stretching out ahead. You step back into the corridor, cloak snug, and walk on through the castle's layered hierarchy of discomfort, feeling oddly grateful for your own warm, modern bed, waiting somewhere far beyond these walls. You leave the Lord's chambers behind, slipping once more into the long corridor, where the torchlight wavers in nervous little breaths. The castle feels quieter now, its winter sighs softened into something almost reflective. As you walk, your footsteps echo gently, less like the crisp clicks you've heard all night, and more like whispers fading into the past. And maybe that's fitting, because this part of your journey begins to stretch outward, not through the castle, but through time. You descend a short staircase and pass into a smaller wing where the walls carry fewer tapestries, fewer signs of warmth, fewer signs of life. It feels older here, older even than the rest of the castle, which already feels ancient. You trail your hand along the stones and feel their texture shift subtly beneath your fingertips, like one layer of history resting on another. Some stones smoother, some rougher, some bearing faint construction marks from masons long faded into dust. You step through a narrow archway and find yourself in a modest storage room. A collapsed wooden rack leans half-broken against the wall, its slats warped and rotted. Dust clings to everything in a soft, velvety layer. You run a finger across a shelf, leaving a line in the gray powder. This space hasn't been used in a long time, not hours, not years, longer. And as you stand there, you begin to sense it, the way the castle sheds pieces of itself, century by century. How every abandoned corner becomes a time capsule of sorts. You close your eyes. When you open them again, the room feels lighter. And not just the room, the entire castle. You walk back into the corridor and, in the soft torchlight, imagine the centuries turning over like pages of a slow, gentle book. You move as though time drifts with you. The walls begin to shift, subtly at first, small cracks smoothing out, plaster reappearing in places where it had fallen. The draft at your ankles fades as shutters realign and gaps close. The tapestries along the hall brighten in color, their threads regaining life. You're moving backward, drifting into an era when the castle still stood in its prime, not romanticized, not sanitized, but before neglect and weather began their steady, inevitable work. A group of stonemasons appears ahead of you, laughing, working, repairing a stairwell. They don't notice you. You watch them for a moment as they lift stones with ease, their breath fogging in the winter air, the hard rhythm of their chisels echoing through the corridor. They argue, jovially, about whether a particular arch should be repaired or rebuilt entirely. And here's your historical fact of this section. Castles weren't static structures. They evolved constantly. Builders added towers, strengthened walls, expanded keeps, filled in old gaps, created new ones. Castles changed like living things, growing and reshaping themselves depending on war, wealth, and whim. You turn another corner and the torches burn brighter, the tapestries thicker, the rushes fresher. A noble walks past you, robes sweeping behind him, fur collar brushing against his jaw, as he heads toward a bustling great hall, alive with sound. You hear it faintly, laughter, instruments, the clinking of cups, a crackling hearth that, for once, actually does its job. The castle is alive, brilliantly, vividly alive. You smile softly at the warmth radiating from the hall. Not literal warmth. You still feel a chill in your fingers, but emotional warmth. A place pulsing with voices and footsteps and light. But you don't step inside, not yet. Instead, you drift upward again, following a stairwell that feels less haunted by cold now and more humming. You emerge onto the ramparts, where torches blaze against the night sky. Guards stand confidently along the battlements. The wind is harsh, but morale is high. The stone beneath your feet feels firm, proud. You lean against the parapet, looking out over land that stretches for miles. No highway lights, no towns glowing in the distance. just darkness, moonlight, and the faint sparkle of a river slicing through the valley. A view worth defending, a view that defined the importance of this castle centuries ago. You breathe it in, cold, crisp, clean. Then, slowly, time shifts again. The guards fade. Torches extinguish. The stone beneath your hands grows rougher. Cracks widen. Lichen creeps along the mortar in delicate green threads. You turn around, and the castle behind you has begun to slump under the weight of the years. Down below, the great hall stands silent. Its roof sags in one place. A shutter hangs crookedly from a window. The banners are gone. The courtyard lies empty, except for tufts of grass poking through between stones. A forgotten well sits in the corner, its wooden cover half collapsed. You descend the stairs again, feeling moss beneath your fingertips. The walls moan softly with the wind, not from tension, but from age. The torches are replaced by shafts of moonlight cutting through broken slits in the stone. You pass the servant quarters, empty, hollow, filled with shadows. The knight's chamber now reveals a collapsed bed frame and a shattered chest. The lord's chamber has lost one of its window panes, letting the night air flow freely. The castle is no longer a home, it's a husk, a monument, a memory. The air feels different now, lighter, freer, unburdened by daily life. This is the beginning of the next transformation, from fortress to ruin, from ruin to romantic symbol. You step through a gaping archway where a door once hung and find yourself in the courtyard. Moonlight spills across the worn stones. A vine winds lazily across one of the remaining walls, tracing the outlines of ancient windows. You kneel and touch the ground. The earth feels softer here, reclaiming what once belonged to stone. You think of poets who wandered through ruins centuries later, marveling at their grandeur, their melancholy beauty. You imagine painters sitting at easels capturing the broken silhouette of this same castle at dawn. You picture travelers whispering legends about the place long after the last fire went out. And here's your quirky tidbit. During the 18th and 19th centuries, wealthy tourists adored ruins. People deliberately sought out crumbling castles for the aesthetic, the picturesque decay. They sketched them, picnicked near them, and even wrote romantic novels inspired by the melancholy charm of stones slowly yielding to nature. A cold, drafty, uncomfortable fortress suddenly became a place of dreams. You look around now and see why. There's something breathtaking about the way moonlight balances on broken battlements, something calming in the hush of wind slipping through empty corridors. Something deeply peaceful in the knowledge that the place has endured through winters, sieges, fires, celebrations, and now rests quietly, letting moss and ivy write the final chapters. Historians still argue whether romanticizing ruins distorts the reality of medieval life. They debate whether we project too much beauty onto what was once hardship. But as you stand here, wrapped in your fur cloak, surrounded by moonlit stone, you think maybe both can be true? Maybe a place can be harsh in life and beautiful in memory. You wander through the courtyard one last time. The doorways are hollow, the windows are wide open, the walls, once solid, now breathe with the night. And as you step back through an archway toward the keep, you feel the pull of the present returning, pulling you gently toward your own warm, fully insulated modern life. You smile softly, one more section left, and the castle fades just a little behind you. You step back into what remains of the keep, the broken archway framing a stretch of moonlit rubble behind you. The fur cloak around your shoulders has grown familiar now, your quiet companion through cold, smoke, drafts, and centuries, and as you walk up a set of time-worn stairs, you realize your body has started to anticipate every shift in temperature, every whisper of wind, every creak of stone. The castle has taught you its rhythms, not comfortable rhythms, but real ones. You emerge into an upper passage where the roof still holds and the air feels momentarily calm. A patch of moonlight falls through a distorted shard of glass, still clinging to a window frame, painting a pale rectangle on the floor. Dust drifts in the beam. Swirling gently with each of your breaths, you pause, letting the stillness settle in your chest. There's a quiet beauty to it, the kind you only notice after walking through so much discomfort. You wander forward, boots muffled against old rush remnants and silted stone, and as you walk, your mind gently shifts. You start to compare this freezing, shadow-filled fortress to something much closer, your own warm bedroom waiting beyond the edge of this dream-like walk, the softness of your pillow, the hum of your heater, the luxury of silence not caused by doors slamming in the wind or rats performing tiny drum solos in the walls. You turn into another chamber, this one nearly empty except for a collapsed bench and a few stray stones. Through a wide crack in the wall, you see the outside world stretching into the distance. Fields, forests, little curls of mist rising from the earth. You step closer, resting your hands on the jagged edge. The wind brushes your face, cool but not cruel. You inhale deeply. The castle scent is still there, earth, smoke, stone, but softer now, more faded with time. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Even when castles were still occupied, comfort wasn't the goal. Defense, status, and storage came first. Warmth, light, and ease came home last, if at all. People simply lived differently. They accepted what the stone gave them, and they adjusted everything else, clothing, routines, expectations, to match. A loose stone crumbles under your boot, and you step back carefully. The room hums with age, every draft, every groan of the timbers reminding you that this place has outlived kings, wars, seasons, and stories. And yet, as ruins, castles often feel gentler than they did in their prime, more quiet, more honest, less concerned with impressing anyone. You move toward another doorway, where moonlight forms a faint silver pathway. It guides you up one last staircase, worn thin in the center, edges chipped from centuries of footsteps. You climb slowly, running your hand along the wall for balance. The touch feels almost like a goodbye gesture, you to the castle to you. At the top you find the highest interior landing still intact. A roof beam hangs above you, half broken but stubbornly holding on. Through two large glassless windows, the night sky spills in, blue-black, star-dusted, serene. You walk to the largest opening and lean on the sill, staring out over the land that once depended on these stone walls for protection. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Some travelers in the 1700s and 1800s believed that sleeping in castle ruins brought special dreams, visions of past residents or echoes of old battles. You smile softly. Maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe the drafts carry old memories the way modern vents carry warm air. You close your eyes for a moment and let the breeze wash over you. No torches flicker here, no servants mutter, no guards pace. Just you and the breath of a building that has learned how to rest. When you open your eyes, the land feels closer somehow. The castle doesn't seem forbidding anymore, just quiet, soft, maybe even gentle. Historians still argue whether we're too nostalgic about ruins. If we smooth out the edges, forget the cold, the smells, the constant discomfort. But as you stand here, gazing out over fields glowing faintly in the moonlight, you realize nostalgia isn't wrong. It's a bridge. It lets you visit a world without living its hardships. It lets you walk through misery and emerge feeling peaceful. And that's exactly what's happening now. You take a final deep breath of castle air. The cold fills your lungs, but doesn't bite anymore. The draft brushes your cheek, but doesn't sting. The darkness presses in gently, not like a threat, but like a blanket ready to wrap around you. Then, slowly, you turn away from the window and take the path back down the stairs. Each step brings you closer to warmth, closer to comfort, closer to the soft glow of your own world waiting outside these stone walls. By the time you reach the lower corridors again, the castle feels dimmer, quieter, fading behind you like a dream you're already forgetting the edges of. You step toward the final doorway. A last breath of cold air drifts past you, not harsh, not urgent, just a whisper, and the castle lets you go. Your steps become slower now, softer, as though the stone floor beneath you has turned from cold rock into something gentler, something that wants to guide you forward rather than make you shiver. Each movement seems to stretch into the next with a long, easy rhythm, like the castle itself is exhaling after centuries of holding tension in its walls. Your shoulders ease, your breath smooths. Even the fur cloak around you feels warmer, heavier, more welcoming. The last hallway is dim but calm, lit only by a smear of moonlight that drifts along the floor like a pale ribbon. You follow it without thinking, letting it lead you toward a quietness that feels deeper than anything you've felt tonight. The drafts have quieted, the murmurs of old rooms have softened, and the constant hum of cold air has melted into a slow, steady lull that seems to wrap itself around your mind. As you move, the castle behind you feels farther away, not in distance, but in presence. Its sharp edges blur, its harsh winds fade. The great stone walls that once towered over you now feel like soft silhouettes dissolving into the night. Every step makes them dimmer, more distant, until they're just a memory, cool, ancient, and peaceful in their own way. You reach a final archway. Beyond it is only darkness, but not an unfriendly one. It's the kind of darkness that feels like a blanket, warm and deep, waiting to settle across your thoughts. You pause at the threshold, take one last slow breath, and feel the cold fall away like a forgotten weight. The night holds you now, quiet, steady, safe. Let your eyes close. Let the last traces of stone and shadow drift into mist. Let sleep come softly, like a warm light behind your eyelids.